I feel like every man has at least one interesting fun fact ready to share, and I am stuck at this work dinner looking to entertain myself. I will start. Human beings' ability to smell petrichor, which is the scent of wet earth after rainfall, is stronger than a shark's ability to smell blood in the water. Story 1. The blanket octopus is immune to the venom of the Portuguese man-of-war and uses its tentacles as venomous flails to defend against other sea creatures. Story 2. If you are tending bees and you smell bananas, it is their alert pheromone. They are not ready to attack yet, but you are being investigated and should wrap up whatever you are doing. Story 3. The last time all humans were on Earth together was November 2nd, 2000. The Expedition 1 crew launched to the International Space Station on October 31st, 2000, and began their long-term stay on November 2nd. At least one person has been on the International Space Station ever since. Story 4. When growing rhubarb, they deprive it of sunlight because this signals to the rhubarb that it needs to grow quickly to find sunlight. It grows so fast that you can hear it pop and crack as it grows in real time. Story 5. Sea otters hold hands while they sleep so that they do not float away. I like to share that after I accidentally ruin the mood by bringing up sad topics. Story 6. The fastest animal is either the white-throated needle-tailed swift, the Eurasian hobby, or the Mexican free-tailed bat. Reports and data vary on the speed of these creatures, placing them all around 100 miles per hour, 160 kilometers per hour. The peregrine falcon, often listed as the fastest animal, does not count because it does not actually propel itself. To achieve its speed, it dives from heights nearing 3,000 feet, just over half a mile and nearly 1 kilometer, and reaches a terminal velocity of 240 miles per hour, 390 kilometers per hour. Saying that the peregrine falcon is the fastest is like saying I am faster than you because I have gone skydiving and you have not. More fun facts. The black marlin is debatable as the fastest in the sea, reaching 80 miles per hour, 130 kilometers per hour. And the cheetah is the fastest on land at 70 miles per hour, 115 kilometers per hour. The fastest animal with respect to body length is some ant or termite in California. If a human could reach a similar body length per second speed, they would be going around 1,500 miles per hour. Story 7. Bees and flowers communicate using electricity, primarily through the electrostatic fields they generate and interact with. Flowers, being grounded and negatively charged, can pick up electric charges, while bees gain a positive charge as they fly. This interaction facilitates pollination. When the bees land on the positively charged flowers, the pollen will jump from the flower to the bee, leaving them both neutrally charged. Bees can even learn to distinguish between flowers with different electrical fields, potentially indicating nectar availability. Story 8. The Appalachian Mountains formed before bones evolved, so there are no fossils there. They also formed before plants developed the tree structure. Story 9. I have been reading a book on supply chains by Peter Goodman and learned that cargo ships can hold 12,000 shipping containers. This fact is not useful to me, but it is a much larger number than anyone expects, so I find it interesting. Story 10. Bottled water does not expire because of the water. It expires because of the plastic bottle, which releases microplastics into the water over time until it is deemed unsafe to drink. Story 11. There exists a concept in mathematics called perfect numbers. We have only found 52 even perfect numbers, and we have never found an odd perfect number. A perfect number is a number whose factors add up to equal that number. For example, 6. 1 plus 2 plus 3. Story 12. Bananas, watermelons, and avocados are true botanical berries. Strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries are not true berries. They are aggregate fruits. Story 13. Female hyenas have pseudopenises. To reproduce, they must actively retract them, making it nearly impossible for females to be forced into sexual engagement with males unless they choose to. They also have a matriarchal social structure. Story 14. The first literary reference to dildos is from the Bible. Ezekiel 16 verse 17. God reprimands the people of Jerusalem for taking the precious metals he bestowed upon them, making phallic images with them, and fornicating with them. Story 15. The little slits in the corner of a dog's nose create an air vortex that forces scent particles into their nostrils even while exhaling. Story 16. Australia is wider than the moon. The distance from east to west across Australia is about 2,480 miles, while the diameter of the moon is about 2,154 miles. Great conversation starter. Story 17. If a scar is deep enough to go through the dermis, it will never sweat or grow hair again. Similarly, if you develop scurvy, which is a severe vitamin C deficiency, your scars can reopen. This happens because scars are in a constant healing process that requires collagen, and vitamin C is the main source of new collagen. Story 18. Mud crabs are older than trees. One country separates North Korea and Norway. Statistically, every single person of white European origin is descended from Charlemagne the Great. Technically, England was involved in both the longest and shortest wars ever to take place. The oldest continuously running school in the world is in England, and it is older than England. Story 19. Sharks evolved before trees did. In 1969, humans landed on the moon, and in 1970, they put wheels on luggage. Story 20. More men have walked on the moon, 12, than have scored a run against Mariano Rivera in the postseason, 11. To add more context, Mariano pitched in 96 postseason games, more than any other player in history. The Sandman was unstoppable. Story 21. There are 5.6 people per square mile in Vatican City. The last man killed during the construction of the Hoover Dam was the son of the first man killed during its construction. Maine is the closest United States state to Africa. Story 22. If our sun, into which 1.3 million Earths can fit, was the size of a white blood cell, approximately 10 to 20 microns, a human hair is 80 microns, then our galaxy would be the size of the United States. There are millions of galaxies. Story 23. Chicago is not nicknamed the Windy City because of wind. Journalists in New York back in the late 1800s, as the First World's Fair was approaching, coined the name due to all the hot air coming from Chicago journalists about why Chicago was just as good or better than New York. Story 24. Pluto is smaller than Earth's moon. The moon has a smaller diameter than the distance from east to west shore of Australia at its longest point. Story 25. Back in World War II, the Germans built an entire base out of wood, wooden planes, wooden hangars, the whole structure, to fool the Allied forces. The Allied forces waited until it was complete and dropped a single wooden bomb on it. Story 26. One not-so-fun fact. Steel and iron can rust, also known as oxidize, so aggressively that they can remove oxygen from enclosed spaces. A ship's anchor chain can make its own storage compartment lethally deoxygenated just by sitting there and rusting for a couple of days. Sadly, this was discovered the hard way. A much more fun fact. In the Lord of the Rings movies specifically, Legolas the elf and Frodo the hobbit never exchange words, despite both being members of the titular Fellowship of the Ring. Legolas does say, "and my bow," but this is more of an exclamation than an exchange. One more fun fact. Cats can see much more ultraviolet light than humans. Humans could see about the same amount of ultraviolet as a cat, except the components of our eyes block it. Cats' eyes are clearer to ultraviolet, so they get to experience it. Maybe when they stare fixedly at the wall for no reason, it is due to an ultraviolet thing we just don't perceive. Story 27. When you have a bowel movement, your anus forms the same shape as your mouth does when you say the phrase, bowel movement. This also applies to the phrase, explosive diarrhea. Story 28. Last week, the grandson of John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States, died. John Tyler was born in 1790, and his grandson died in 2025. Story 29. Dolphins are cetaceans, the same category as whales and porpoises. Their closest relatives are actually hippos. Story 30. Boba is Mandarin for big-breasted. Therefore, the Chinese do not call it boba. They call those small tapioca balls pearls instead. Story 31. Older men who are single on average die about 2 years sooner than their married counterparts. As a comparison, cholesterol-lowering medicines like statins extend the average person's life by about 3.5 months. Story 32. Lobsters die because they are unable to shed their shell. This and barnacles are their biggest killers. If they can shed and are kept free of barnacles, they could probably grow and live indefinitely. Story 33. I knew about petrichor, but I did not realize how sensitive we are to it. Very interesting. One example from my experience is that eating asparagus results in smelly urine with a sulfuric odor. This happens to everyone, but only a percentage of the population carries the gene required to be able to detect the smell. Story 34. Michael Jackson's song, Smooth Criminal, is about a paramedic and emergency medical technician at a crime scene. The first part features a police officer explaining the scenario, followed by a paramedic running through the situation and performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Eventually, the life is lost, and sadly, the victim passes away. Story 35. Humans have an observed mortality rate of more than 95%. In other words, less than 5% of all the humans who have ever lived are alive right now. Story 36. Whales, dolphins, and other cetaceans have no connection between their mouth and their lungs. They can only breathe through their blowholes. Story 37. Michael Jackson's Pepsi commercial accident happened 2,981 days after he was born. He would die exactly 2,981 days later. Story 38. The moon is too massive and moves too quickly to have been caught in the Earth's orbit. Therefore, scientists believe the moon is a chunk that was broken off the Earth by a large meteor. Also, the moon always has the same face pointing towards the Earth. The moon appears basically the same size in the sky as the sun. Story 39. More particle interactions happened in the first second of the universe than are expected to happen in the entire rest of the life of the universe by several orders of magnitude, due to how close everything was. It reminds me of that animation on YouTube with the blocks colliding with perfect elasticity on a frictionless plane. When the trailing block is much more massive than the block that hits the wall first, almost all the collisions happen in a fraction of a second right next to the wall. If you scale up the mass of the trailing block, you can count the collisions as a very inefficient way to calculate pi. Story 40. Mature saltwater crocodiles die from starvation when they lose their teeth to decay. If that did not happen, we do not know how long they could live. Do not teach them how to brush their teeth. Story 41. If every man, woman, and child stood on the equator and held hands across the earth, a significant number of them would drown. Story 42. Seen from Alpha Centauri, our sun is in the constellation Cassiopeia. The fact that the chimpanzee genus Pan is the closest living genetic cousin to humans of the genus Homo is well known. Less well known is that humans are the closest cousin to chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are closer to humans than they are to gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, or any other genus. Closer than rats are to mice. Closer than African elephants are to Asian elephants. Story 43. Mammaries are modified sweat glands. Platypus and echidnas lack nipples and instead secrete milk from patches that the babies lick up. The name for the babies of both is a puggle. Story 44. Tylenol, paracetamol, and acetaminophen are the most used drugs in the world, and we have no clear understanding of how or why they actually work. Story 45. Every banana you have eaten is genetically the same banana, the Cavendish banana. Story 46. Salvador Dali designed the Chupa Chups logo. Edinburgh is further west than Bristol. Story 47. Most people with schizophrenia do not actually see or hear things. They struggle with the delusion aspect of the condition. Story 48. My 6 times great uncle on the United States branch of our family tree is an Oscar-winning cinematographer. He worked on Gone with the Wind, helped develop the talkie films in the 1920s, and many of the Technicolor films were filmed by him, as the studios did not know how to use it and left it to him to figure out. Story 49. Only about 3% of people who have epilepsy are photosensitive, which is around 0.03% of the population. Story 50. Most people do not comprehend how much $1 billion is. For perspective, if you make $1,000 a day and never spend a penny or take a day off, how long would it take to reach $1 billion? It would take just over 2,739 years without a day off. That is an income of $365,000 per year for 2,739 years to reach $1 billion. Story 51. If a large enough asteroid slams into the Earth fast enough, before it even hits, it will compress the atmosphere and cause it to combust. My brain likes to imagine being not directly under it, but far enough away that you see it and realize it is the end of the world. Story 52. All the blood vessels in your body, if strung together in a line, would be about 20,000 kilometers long, almost enough to wrap around the Earth. Story 53. The Great Lakes have a surf culture. An Australian attention deficit hyperactivity disorder brain doing a deep dive one night. Also, before my time, not so much a fact, but a moment I know a lot about that gives me chills. Vancouver, Vancouver. This is it. Story 54. Rats have been trained to drive cars, and they enjoy it a lot. They are also ticklish and will laugh if you tickle them. Story 55. The eyes are the windows to the soul. They also perform necessary functions, often subconsciously. Your pupils dilate when you are interested in or attracted to someone. The subconscious interprets dilated pupils as interest. Your pupils also dilate in dim light to let in more light. This is why bars and nice restaurants generally have dim lighting. Hiding the stains on the floor is a side effect. This is about atmosphere. The lights are low so everyone's pupils are dilated. Some may be more than others. The brain interprets the pupil dilation as interest. People feel more comfortable around each other as a result. Everyone has a good time at the establishment. Credentials: 13 years in the optical industry. American Board of Opticianry certified for 9 years. Story 56. The punch of a mantis shrimp in the ocean is so strong that it creates a spark in the water because of the cavitation bubble. It is the strongest punch of any animal on Earth. After World War II, the sonar net that was used to find enemy submarines was turned to science to study the ocean. Scientists discovered a crackling noise throughout the world's oceans, and it took them years to determine that it was the sound of the mantis shrimp punching objects all around the world. Story 57. Sharks are older than Polaris. Not just the concept of Polaris, but the actual star itself. In addition, that puts their age ahead of the rings of Saturn and, as someone else said, trees. Story 58. One of the difficulties of time travel is determining where you would end up. The Earth rotates, revolves around the Sun, and the entire solar system moves around the center of the galaxy. You may leave a building and land in the middle of an empty field, hundreds of feet in the air, or even in space, depending on how far back you go. Story 59. The only place on Earth where the Venus flytrap naturally grows is in the continental United States. There is a narrow band near the coast along the border of North Carolina and South Carolina where they grow. People often think they are jungle plants, but they are not. Story 60. Neptune has diamond rain. Peanuts are peas or legumes, not nuts. There was a man who ate an actual plane. Story 61. People who say that cilantro tastes like soap have a specific genetic mutation that causes this. All people with blue eyes share a common ancestor. Story 62. Open the paper sleeve that adhesive bandages come in the dark. The glue produces a static charge as you peel the paper apart. Story 63. The last person to receive a Civil War pension was Irene Triplett. She received the pension until May 31, 2020, when she died from complications during surgery. Story 64. The autochrome lumiere was an early form of color photography that utilized dyed microscopic grains of potato starch to capture the color of a subject or scene. Produced amazingly detailed images. Story 65. If you are a professional football player, you are statistically more likely to be bitten by a Luis Suarez than by a shark. Story 66. Trees communicate to the fungus in the ground that they have mineral deficiencies. The fungus in turn leaches minerals from rocks and earth and feeds them to the trees. The trees and the fungus do not have brains or decision-making capabilities. Story 67. The clean vocals on the song Hatred Copter by Deathclock, animated as Pickles the drummer, are voiced by James Hetfield of Metallica. Story 68. The Airbus A220-300 and A220-100, known as BSC-1 and BSC-3 on automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, makes a whale-like noise due to the way air travels over and through the engines, which are Pratt & Whitney 1500W engines. This sound is similar to the Vulcan's howl but more subdued. It can become quite loud, especially when the aircraft is low on approach or taxiing. Story 69. In Irish Gaelic, the singular and plural words for bear are said almost identically, though the spelling is quite different. The singular is bear and the plural is byre. Story 70. An orbiting satellite is falling to Earth as fast as it can fall all the time. The trick is it is moving sideways so fast that it keeps missing. Story 71. The same man who created Wonder Woman's lasso of truth also invented the lie detector machine. Story 72. 300 million years ago, large tree-like plants evolved before fungi developed the ability to break down fibrous lignin, which helped give the plants structure. With nothing to cause them to decay, their remains were able to accumulate and form thick coal deposits. This is the source of much of our coal today. There are a few other ways coal is formed, but not in the quantities seen during that period. At the current rate of consumption, coal reserves are estimated to last approximately 150 years. Story 73. The New Zealand national men's badminton team used to be called the Black Cocks. This was an unfortunate coincidence resulting from our tendency to name sports teams with black, white, or silver, combined with a reference to the equipment or terrain of the respective sport. Story 74. Here is one. There are more hydrogen atoms in a single water molecule than there are stars in our entire solar system. I have fun in strange ways. Story 75. Oh, or where, in French, is the only word in the French language where the accent grave, a downward sloping diacritic, appears above the letter U. Story 76. 9-banded armadillos are natural hosts for the bacteria that cause leprosy. Make sure you do not have any open wounds when handling one, or you could contract leprosy. Story 77. Murphy's Law states that the best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask a question. It is to post the wrong answer. Story 78. The fact that gravity affects time on planets and that time is also relative to it is important. For example, if I were on a high-gravity planet while you were in space waiting, time would pass faster for you than for me. So, 40 minutes on a planet could be years for you in space. There are other variables, but time dilation can be affected by gravity. Story 79. Koalas can have chlamydia. This fact may be surprising to some people. Estimated time of arrival. It is also one of the reasons you probably should not hold a koala. Sometimes they urinate on you. Story 80. A Rubik's Cube has over 43 quintillion ways it can be shuffled and can always be solved in 20 moves. Story 81. There are two classic blunders, the most famous of which is, never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less well known is this, never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. Story 82. A hole without a donut is a donut hole. A donut without a hole is a Danish. On a side note, whenever I meet someone and they ask me what I do for a living, I always reply, well, it depends on the situation. Story 83. After the success of Disneyland, which opened in 1955, Walt Disney planned to open his next theme park in the tourist mecca known as St. Louis, Missouri. Story 84. An astronomical unit is a measure of the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Simply put, it is the time it takes for light from the Sun to reach Earth, which is roughly 8 minutes. The distance from the Sun to Earth is 94 million miles. If we scale that down so that one astronomical unit is 1 inch, the distance to the Andromeda Galaxy would still be 2.5 million miles away. Story 85. The Coen brothers obtained the rights to use the Rolling Stones song Dead Flowers for free after their manager saw the scene where the dude tells the taxi driver that he hates the Eagles. Story 86. Pirates are some of the first known users of night vision. They did not wear eye patches because they were missing an eye, although some might have, but not the majority. They would spend all day in the sun with one eye covered, so when they went below deck, they could swap the covered eye and did not have to wait for their eyes to adjust to the dark. Story 87. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you are almost certainly holding the first and last instance of the deck being in that exact order. There are more possible arrangements of a deck of cards than there are atoms on the planet. Story 88. During an eclipse, we can see stars behind the sun that we would normally never have the chance to see. Also, humans' best natural weapon after the brain is endurance. We literally used to chase our prey to death. Story 89. You cannot actually feel being wet. It is just pressure and temperature you can feel, which is why a cold shirt pressing on you feels wet. The Caesar salad was named after a man in Tijuana, not the famous person everyone assumes. The odd feeling or texture you get on your hands after using cleaning products, such as bleach or disinfectant wipes, is the top layer of your skin dissolving from the chemicals. The fastest bite in the animal kingdom is actually from an ant, specifically the trapjaw ant. While not fully confirmed, there are hundreds of man-made structures located in the Amazon rainforest that we are now discovering thanks to light detection and ranging technology, dating up to 3,500 years old. A majority of them have a main point that faces astronomical north, which requires an understanding of astronomy. Additionally, these structures were made in circular and square patterns that still hold true today. It is well documented that these types of patterns and shapes appear in ayahuasca visuals. There may be some overlap between prehistoric drug use and the basis of understanding mathematics and astronomy. Story 90. If you traveled at the speed of light, it would take 100,000 years to cross the Milky Way galaxy. Story 91. There are more trees on our planet than there are stars in our galaxy, by an order of magnitude. Story 92. The Ford Pinto was not remotely dangerous relative to the standards of its time. It is an absolute death trap compared to modern cars, but that applies to any car from that period. Its safety was completely average for the time, and in fact, the beloved Toyota Corolla was significantly more likely to cause fatal injuries than the Pinto was. You were just as likely to die from a collision caused by the transmission failing on a Pinto as you were to burn alive. Also, the claim that Ford determined it was cheaper to let people die and pay the families instead of fixing the Pinto is completely fictitious. It never happened. Story 93. Tennessee Williams decided to name the female lead in a streetcar named Desire at a Philadelphia Athletics baseball game in the early 1950s when a beer vendor yelled, "Stella," as he was selling Stella Artois to thirsty fans. So, next time you order a Stella Artois at a bar and your uncultured buddy yells, "Stella," maybe he is not so uncultured after all. Story 94. A man in my hometown was shot 13 times and survived back in the 1800s. A law from the 1800s that still exists allowed people to kill any person of Chinese descent if found outside after dark. The law may have been somewhat exaggerated when the city tour guide told us, but I still share it as a fun fact when I am invited to parties. Story 95. This one is probably well known, but our sense of touch is so good that if we held the planet in our hands, we would be able to tell the difference between cars and houses on our fingertips. Story 96. I do not know if it is the best example, but I love telling people that birds spread plant seeds through their droppings. Most people are usually shocked. Story 97. If you tuck a chicken's head under its wing and rock it back and forth for a few seconds, it falls asleep. Literally under 10 seconds. Story 98. Because light takes time to travel, the further out in space you look, the further back in time you look. Because the Big Bang tells us the universe started as a single point in space, if you look far enough, every direction you look is towards the center of the universe. Story 99. As a woman, this thread is proof that when you ask a man what he is thinking about, it really is all these random facts or absolutely nothing. That is it, ladies. Story 100. Fun fact. It is physically impossible to say the word petrichor without immediately explaining that it means the smell of rain on dry earth. Story 101. A common corticosteroid given at many hospitals through an intravenous line, dexamethasone, also known as Decadron, can cause a sensation of perineal warmth when administered too quickly. If a nurse is giving you an intravenous push steroid and it feels like there is a burning sensation in the genital area, that is the reason. Story 102. The Farson Islands are the farthest from Rome that the Roman Empire held. They were able to prove that they had an outpost at least around 144 Anno Domini. Story 103. In some countries, you can sue people who have an affair with your spouse and claim compensation. The Yakuza regularly strip down to their underpants and walk around at a famous festival to show off their tattoos. Subaru vehicles were stealth marketed to lesbians. Wombats produce cube-shaped feces. Many Japanese drivers watch television shows while driving. You can eat most parts of a polar bear, but eating the liver will kill you. It is not uncommon to see Japanese teenagers walking around carrying longbows. The Canadian government developed a homosexual detector called the Fruit Machine to identify gay men and dismiss them from their jobs. Story 104. The reason thresher sharks have such long tails is that they can use them as a kind of underwater flashbang. They whip their tails at a school of fish, creating enough force to stun a few of them, which they then pick off. If the tail hits one of the fish directly, it could slice it straight in half. Story 105. In ancient and medieval times, most people were right-handed and carried their swords on their left hip. This meant they preferred to mount their horses from the left to avoid interference with their weapon. As horseback travel was common, riders naturally kept to the left side of the road to keep their sword arm free in case of an encounter. This practice carried over into the era of horse-drawn carriages, where drivers often sat on the right side to control the reins with their dominant hand while watching oncoming traffic. After the French Revolution, French-influenced countries switched to traveling on the right side of the road, but the tradition of mounting a horse on the left side continued. This is why the doors on planes are on the left side, and designs like the retractable ladders of the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II and the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor are also on the left side of the plane. Story 106. There is no rigorous mathematical proof that 1 + 1 = 2. Attempts have been made, but they are not very good. Instead, we accept this as an axiom. Story 107. When Top Gun Maverick was released, more time had passed between the first flight of the F-14 Tomcat and the release of the movie than the time that passed between the first flight of the Spitfire or any World War II propeller aircraft and the release of the first Top Gun movie. Story 108. Chariots were wide enough to fit 2 horses side by side. The tracks chariots left in the dirt were later used as a model for train tracks. There is a tunnel that was part of the old Space Shuttle rocket path, which a train had to pass through, and it dictated the total width. Basically, the United States space program relied on a rocket design dictated by the width of 2 horses for many years. Story 109. February 30th was a day that happened in Sweden in 1712. This occurred because, instead of changing from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar by omitting a block of consecutive days, as had been done in other countries, the Swedish Empire planned to change gradually by omitting all leap days from 1700 to 1740, inclusive, so that the next leap year after 1696 would not be until 1744. Story 110. Thomas Midgley Jr. was an American engineer and chemist who probably caused more harmful impact on human health and the environment than any other person in the history of humankind. He developed leaded gasoline, which contained tetraethyl lead and chlorofluorocarbons, also known as CFCs. He also died by one of his own inventions. Story 111. Kangaroo pouches are not as they are depicted in children's animations. They are literally openings in the skin. Baby kangaroos wear their mothers like giant mechanical suits. Story 112. Fun fact about nuclear fusion. Did you know if you combined elements, for example, platinum and hydrogen, you would get the element gold? Platinum has 78 protons on the periodic table, and hydrogen has 1 proton. However, the energy required to do this is immense. This process is the building block of life. Our sun is essentially a gigantic nuclear fusion device, fusing hydrogen and producing helium. Story 113. If there is a pond full of ducks, you can start throwing pumpkins into the pond, and after a while, they get used to them. Then you can put a jack-o'-lantern over your head, go into the water, grab ducks by the legs, and pull them under to drown them. The other ducks will not react. Story 114. I have one for you. The average adult has indirect contact with 11 male genitalia and 8 female genitalia every week from touching door handles. Story 115. I cannot smell ammonia. I was tested at a laboratory in case of a leak, and everyone gave me dirty looks when I failed. Also, when I use this as a fun story, it is not. People think I am gross or something. Story 116. Within a certain range of the crossing gates for train tracks, if you connect the tracks with jumper cables, the crossing gates will come down and stay down. No train is necessary. Bonus: if you put the metal end of an incandescent light bulb into a cup with a few inches of water, it will light up when you put it in a microwave oven within a few seconds. Yes, I have done both many times. Story 117. Ancient Romans are the reason that the rockets we use to propel objects into outer space are the size that they are. Story 118. I do not have one in the chamber, but I want to point out that fun fact is redundant. All facts are fun. Story 119. Petrichor is not as simple as original poster made it out to be. Check this out. Story 120. An adjustable spanner and a normal spanner have a correct way to use them. It is important not to use them as a hammer. Always use them in the same way you use a pipe wrench, by pulling. Story 121. Fire is photosynthesis in reverse. Writing a combustion reaction is essentially the opposite of writing photosynthesis, and you can observe it happening. This works at any campfire. Story 122. Falcons are not raptors. They are closer to parrots. Polly does not want a cracker. He wants a rabbit. Story 123. Girls with eyes slightly too far apart, while considered a defect, are often found most attractive by guys. This fact has caused a lot of trouble. Story 124. Water is not wet. Water makes things wet unless that water is frozen. Then it cannot be wet until it melts. Then it ceases to be wet. Trees and crabs are odd because they are some of the few life forms that may have entirely different evolutionary paths than others of their kind. Trees are woody plants with long stems that have leaves. There are many different plants that eventually became trees but are not genetically related. Similarly, there are 5 modern and 1 ancient separate evolutionary pathways that led to the development of crabs. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.